All right, and we are now being recorded. Any questions you have, please feel free to put those in the chat pod. And at this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Andy Lazor. He is going to be presenting on caring for your septic system and water wells. So we'll get his presentation loaded here.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Lazor. I'm a water quality specialist with University of Maryland Extension, and I'm going to talk to you about caring for your well and septic system. And look forward to any questions that you have. Please put those in the chat box. So in order to talk about wells in particular, I want to talk a little bit about hydrology, just some very basics so that you understand and can appreciate your well, but also understand the connectivity of all of our water. So then I'll cover a little bit about water quality and what you can do to care for your well and testing, and then get into septic systems and caring for your septic system and by maintenance. So it's important to think about this fundamental principle of the water cycle, where we get evaporation, transpiration from the Earth's surface, whether it be land or water, and it then forms clouds, and then we get precipitation, and it lands on the surface, whether it's in our streams, our oceans, our land surfaces. And so anything that's on the land surface itself obviously can run off into our streams, bays, oceans, etc. And then we have water that infiltrates into the ground and then is connected to the groundwater, of course, and then we use that for either our drinking water or irrigating crops, whatever the case may be. So again, it's all connected. And so that's a very important principle. It's also really interesting to note just how many people rely on groundwater for their drinking water. So approximately 28% of Marylanders use wells, whether that's private wells or even some of the public utilities use wells. But so groundwater is a very key source of our drinking water. So the groundwater quality and quantity is related to the geology. And so in Maryland, there are different types of geologies or physiographic provinces, as it's called technically. And you can see here several different provinces. We have the coastal plain on the eastern shore and part of southern Maryland. Then we have the Piedmont and some other regions. And again, our groundwater is influenced by the geology, both in quantity and quality. So if we look at an aquifer, which is basically just stored water, and this is water that's stored in between the particles. So in the coastal plain aquifers, it's stored in between the sand and gravel. We tend to have sand and gravel type of aquifers in the coastal plain, on the shore, etc. And you can see that if you look at those lighter brown colors, those are the aquifers. But there's several aquifers on the shore in southern Maryland that we can tap into, and they are separated by this gray color here. You see what's called confining beds or confining layers. This is basically really tight geology. Water percolates through it or infiltrates through it, but albeit very slow. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And if you contrast that with the Piedmont region in western Maryland, we have what's called fractured rock geology. And the interesting thing about that is that you may have a deep drilled well, but that well, dependent upon the fractures, can be connected to very close surface waters. So it may be very deep, but again, is connected to more of the shallow water table, for example, and therefore is at greater risk of surface contamination. So again, quality varies depending upon your location, and it's highly variable. If you just go a mile down the road or even less, you could have a different type of water quality because of the type of fractures that you're tapping into. This is just a diagram on the different types of well structure. The one on the left is showing a coastal plain where since it's a sand and gravel aquifer, you have a well screen at the bottom there, and it's going through a confining layer. These wells, could be, several hundred feet deep. But in any event, the submersible pump is located at an elevation near the bottom of the drilled well, and has a well screen so that you're not sucking in any soil, sand, etc. Whereas a fractured rock well has an open borehole. So the casing is not as deep as in a coastal plain aquifer, but you have fractures that are supplying the open borehole with water. So that open borehole serves as kind of a reservoir for water when you turn on the pump as well. So again, the geology will dictate the type of well that you have and how it's dug, etc. So here's an interesting graphic by the U.S. Geological Survey that shows both the flow of groundwater and that connectivity that I mentioned earlier, but also recharge and the age of water. So as water hits the land surface, could be called the recharge area. Water infiltrates in, hits that shallow water table, and then that water may be days to years old, but you can also see that the groundwater flows. So off to the left, it's flowing to a well, and off to the right there, you can see that groundwater moving towards the streams. So all of our water is connected. In fact, in Maryland, on average, about over 50% of stream flow is fed by groundwater, emphasizing that connection of all of our water. And then if you look at the deeper aquifers, these confined aquifers, you can see that the age of the water is either centuries or millennia. Again, that's because it takes a very long time for groundwater to infiltrate through these confining beds. But these confined aquifers offer a lot of protection from surface contamination, whereas the shallow water table and that unconfined aquifer, again, are more at risk to whatever sort of surface contamination is occurring. This just shows another example of groundwater movement. The top diagram shows a septic tank in a limestone or fractured geology. Karst geology is referred to sometimes, and you can see the wastewater is moving along a confining layer, but moving off to the left direction. And the bottom diagram is showing different type of geology, more of a sand and gravel aquifer like we have on the shore, that the wastewater is infiltrating into the soil, it's being treated, and then reaches the groundwater, and by that time you've attained the maximum treatment, and therefore you're getting that purification as it moves through the soil. So the soil is really key, and we'll talk more about that later. So it's also important to know when we talk about connection and connectivity of our water, that pretty much everything that we do has a potential of introducing contaminants into our water, certainly our surface water, but also our groundwater as well, whether it be industry, farming, recreation, our driving, landfills, whatever the case may be, it's all connected. And therefore, it just reemphasizes the point that we have to be good stewards of not only our land, but also anything that we do on our land, what we do in our homes, and how we dispose and use various types of chemicals. It's also interesting to note that there are naturally occurring contaminants. And so in Maryland, we have both arsenic belts from the geology and also radon and radium. You can see arsenic on the shore, parts of southern Maryland, but also an area in western Maryland, and then we have some radium issues and then radon as well. And brackish water intrusion, obviously, near the coastal regions, coastal bays, as well as the Chesapeake Bay as well. So we'll talk a little bit about private wells now, and then also, how do you care for it? What do you need to be doing as a well owner to be sure that you have good drinking water quality and to safeguard your well from any contamination. So the thing about private wells is it's just that it's private, and so there is no oversight on wells as far as quality goes, in contrast with a public utility, which is regulated by EPA and the various state agencies responsible for drinking water quality. So it's up to the homeowner not only to test, but to maintain their wells. And, with a lot of contaminants, you wouldn't know if they're present unless you test, because they don't have any sort of obvious taste or odors. The exception, of course, if you have sulfate or sulfide, you would know. Chloride, you would know because of the salty taste. But the others, arsenic, lead, copper, and then any sort of chemical contamination or bacteria contamination, you would know it by taste or smell. And then obviously, so that can be a public health hazard if you do have contamination, particularly if you have bacterial contamination. And again, certain populations, children and pregnant women, are a lot more susceptible to any sort of contamination. So I'll go through some tips on what you can do to protect your well water. And the first thing is just to get familiar with your well. Do you know how, do you know where it is? Do you know where your wellhead is? Do you have any idea of when it was dug? How deep is it? What aquifer is it tapped into? So there's a well completion report, or obviously would be a great source of information. It's also known as the well log. And the next slide is just an example of the Maryland MDE's well log. This is a blank one, but this is a wealth of information. If you don't have this, especially if you have an older home, you may not have it. But if you have a relatively newer home, say in the last 30, 40 years, your local health department may have a copy of this, because when a well is dug, it's permitted by the county environmental health office or public works office, depending upon the county, and they would have a record of this. And it's a wealth of information: when it was dug, how deep, and there's even some quality information as well. So if you don't have that, you can call your health department, and they may or may not have it. But it's just really good information. The other thing is that you can go out and look at your wellhead itself. And there's a couple of things here that you really need to be aware of, and 3 basic tips on how to ensure that your wellhead is protected. And by protecting your wellhead, you're potentially protecting your water quality as well. So it really depends upon the type of well that you have. But, if it's a drilled well, this is going to be kind of a classic diagram for a drilled well. But some of the shallow wells or dug wells that we have, you may not have this standard looking wellhead. You may have some sort of foundation with a cover on it. But regardless, you want to try to seal out any sort of entry of water, insects, whatever the case may be, or any sort of waste, obviously. But a sanitary well cap, if it's a drilled well, is a fundamental piece. More on that in just a second. The other thing is make sure that the casing is well maintained. If you have a metal casing, that can get pitted over time, and if it has little small holes into it, that's a means of contamination getting into the well. It's having the elevation of the ground sloped away from your wellhead is real important. In case of flooding, you're not getting water that potentially contaminated from away from the well getting into near the well. But also the grout, what's this basically a seal along the casing of the well, and that protects water or prevents water from just following the well casing straight down into the well. And over time, that grout can last many decades, but if the well head has been hit or damaged in some way, sometimes that grout seal can be damaged itself, and so you'd want to have that repaired. But those are three basic things. This is the most important one, is that you have a sanitary well cap. They come in metal or plastic, relatively inexpensive, but it fits over the casing, has a gasket, has a means for the electrical conduit to go through to the pump, but it also has little screens on it to allow air in, but to keep out insects. So again, just a worthwhile investment. So if yours is cracked for whatever reason, got hit by a tractor or your mower, you'd want to replace that. The other really important thing to do to protect your water is to understand your water quality. And these are the recommendations to test your well every year for coliform bacteria, E. coli, and nitrate. These are indicators of some sort of animal waste. Since groundwater moves, albeit very slowly, we recommend testing every year for this. That way you'll know if there's any sort of waste getting in, whether it be from a septic system or animals or whatever the case may be, by testing every year for these three basic contaminants. You'll be able to reassure yourself that you're not getting any contamination from human or animal waste. And then every 3 years, or if you haven't done it in a while, is to test for these other parameters: pH, total dissolved solids, fluoride, sulfates, lead, copper, and then any of those naturally occurring contaminants I mentioned, the radon, radium, or arsenic. And your local health department would also have some information if by chance there's some other possible naturally occurring contaminants like manganese, for example. We also recommend that you use a certified lab, and there's plenty of certified labs around the state. There's a link here that you'll have a copy of this and that you could tap into. MDE keeps that list. We also have it on our website as well. We've all heard about lead and the Flint, Michigan issues with lead. Of course, that's a public source, but bring this up just to show you that, to emphasize that these contaminants are odorless and colorless. You wouldn't know if you had it or not. The thing about lead, it's really interesting. It's not coming from the water supply. It's actually coming from your plumbing. So if you have an older home, you may have either fixtures or fittings that contain lead, if you have copper pipe, for example, or you may even have old lead pipe. So that is the issue here. So if your water is slightly corrosive, okay, in Maryland, wells tend to be a little slightly on the corrosive side, depending upon location. So the corrosiveness of the water can actually leach the lead away from the plumbing fixtures. If you have fixtures 1984 and more recent, they have a lot lower lead concentrations in them. They call them lead-free. It's not 100% lead-free, but again, just shows you some of the things. Now, the pictures on the bottom left show some, that's not an indication or a picture of lead, because again, it's colorless. You wouldn't see it, but what you're seeing is actually corrosive water eating away at the sink drain, or you're getting this blue stain, meaning they've got copper pipe and the water's a little corrosive and it's kind of leaching that blue-green color away. And we do have some data from our neighbors. 1 out of 7 private wells had high lead in their water. So it is possible. Again, it's coming from the plumbing. So again, knowing your water, knowing if your water is corrosive, for example, low pH, or if you have a high chloride content, that adds to the corrosion potential of water. You can also test your water for certain things depending upon your location. So if you're near certain operations, we have a lot of issues with road salts, for example, and where sodium and chloride levels are increasing because of the road salt. So again, you have options here depending upon what sort of activities are nearby. And then you can also test for specific problems. So if you're getting stains, whether it be orange or black, that could be an indication of iron manganese. You may have difficulty in getting soap to lather, or you may have a lot of scale on your dishes or appliances. That could be a hardness issue. So again, you can test for specific things that you're seeing in your water. The good news is that there's a lot of treatment options for homes and private wells that can address the various contaminants, whether it be a carbon filter. Reverse osmosis is very common and type of treatment system. It can be put on a faucet, it could be under the sink, or it could be a whole house system depending upon your water quality. But the important thing about treatment is to understand what your water quality is before you buy any sort of treatment. Because if you have, say one or more contaminants, you'll really want to know what is the best treatment system for your particular water quality. Our neighbors to the north, Penn State Extension has a great online drinking water interpretation tool. So once you get your test results, you can plug the numbers in online, and it will pull out a report for you that tells you what the numbers mean, and then also what sort of treatment system it would be recommended. So a great tool, and that link is in the resource section of these slides that you'll have access to. So moving on to some other tips. Again, think about what's going on within about 100 feet of your well. Are you keeping your pets nearby? Mowing, for example, again, mowing can be an issue because you can hit your wellhead and crack the well cap or damage the casing, whatever the case may be. One of the big things that you can do, because people that are on wells are likely also on septic systems, is to pump and maintain your system, and more on that in just a minute. We'll talk about this again, but we recommend pumping your tank every 3 to 5 years, depending upon the number of people and how big your tank is. So the more people and the smaller the tank, the more frequently you're going to want to have your tank pumped. We're getting a lot more interest in using lower toxicity cleaners around the home. Certainly, you also want to consider and not use any sort of pesticide near your wellhead. That's important. And then obviously, just like anything, follow the guidelines for any sort of chemicals that you have. Properly store them, and then properly dispose of them if you have any unused or unwanted. Take them to the recycling operation if your county has that. And if you have any underground storage tanks, as you're getting fuel refilling, make sure that they're checking on the quality of your tank to be sure that it's secure. And another one that's really important, particularly on older properties, is to have any abandoned wells properly sealed. Because abandoned wells are essentially just an open access for contaminants to get into wells. Here's a picture of one. But again, to think about that word I used earlier, connectivity. All of our water is connected. So if we have an open hole, an open well, and water is, running off into it along with whatever, contaminant that's going in, it's contaminating the groundwater. So you definitely want to have that properly sealed, and there's ways to do that properly. The picture in the middle, on the bottom, is showing a special mix of concrete. It's not regular concrete because that's porous, but it's a special mix that will actually properly seal a well. Very important tip for you to be cognizant of if you have older property with any sort of abandoned wells. So we're going to shift gears and talk a little bit about septic systems here. Got a couple of topics related to that. It's important to note that a lot of us use septic systems. 420,000 plus growing septic systems in Maryland. We're getting, as more people move to the rural areas, we're getting more and more septic systems installed. And septic systems are, contribute about 6% of the total nitrogen loading. When we look at the TMDLs, again, it's an important source. And certainly it's important not only from a nutrient standpoint, but it's a potential for pathogenic bacteria, and therefore, has both environmental as well as public health risks. Here's a little diagram on what typical household wastewater looks like. And the important thing to note here is third and fourth row down, biological and chemical oxygen demand. This may not mean anything other than it's just important to note that because of the high organic load of wastewater, it takes a lot of oxygen to break it down. And so oxygen is really important in our septic system. And if you have a conventional system, it's really important that your drain field breathes, if you will, because the bacteria need that oxygen in order to break it down. We have nitrogen, we have phosphorus, fats, oils, and greases, obviously, but then also bacteria. And here's a really interesting number here. 300 plus billion bacterial cells per gallon of wastewater. Okay, and we get this question a lot. Well, should I be using additives to help my septic system or reduce the amount of pumping that we have? And the short answer is no. If you think about it, if you have a 1,000-gallon tank, you've got, what is that, 300 gazillion bacteria cells in your septic system. And so adding, a box or whatever of a few billion cells is really not adding anything. If you are regularly flushing your system, you've got all the beneficial bacteria that you need to break down and help break down your organics. And also the research has shown that some of the additives actually help suspend the organics, which you don't want because you want your organics to settle in that tank before they go into your drain field, because you don't want excessive organics going out to your drain field because it'll clog it. So here's a conventional system. Very simple process. Works on physics, on gravity. You have your wastewater, goes into your septic tank, solids will settle, your fats and oil grease will float, and they're separated out. Then the water goes out into, could be a little distribution box before it then flows out to your drain field, which are, again, basically just means to distribute the wastewater over soil so that it can infiltrate and then be treated in that soil. And then ultimately, that wastewater, that will be filtered, purified, and then it will reach groundwater. All of our wastewater, whether it's a septic tank or even a municipal treatment plant, all that water essentially can eventually reach groundwater. What we want to ensure is that we're properly treating it before it does that. You all know how important soil is, good quality soil is in farming operations, and it's very true in a septic system as well. So again, what we want is a certain amount of soil in order to treat the wastewater. It's called vertical separation. In Maryland, it's 4 feet, but on the Eastern Shore, in a lot of cases, we don't have that 4 feet of vertical separation from the bottom of the drain field to this restrictive layer, whatever that is, the water table or some sort of, tighter geology. But we have these special groundwater permit, basically exceptions in some areas on the Eastern Shore where we don't have that 4 feet of separation. But soil is a tremendous biofilter, and it contains a lot of bacterial cells, beneficial bacteria that help outcompete and actually kill off some of the pathogenic bacteria, but also to help process our nutrients, our organics, our nitrogen, etc. So the soil is doing us a tremendous favor. But again, if we don't have that 4 foot of separation, it can demand kind of a more complex system than a conventional system. for example, a sand mound may be required, depending upon the type of soil, the home, whatever the case may be. It's important to note that every septic system is unique. It's designed based on the soil on the site, as well as the size of the home, number of bedrooms, and things like that. So again, they may be similar in design, but you know, it could be that your home requires 300 feet of trench, but your neighbor requires 250 or 450, just because of the soil type, even if the house was the same size. Here's a diagram of a septic tank. Again, a very simple device. Water comes in from the house, solids settle in that first chamber, and the fats, oils, and grease float up, and that baffle or that chamber prevents those solids and fats from entering the drain field, essentially, and that's really important. The second chamber just adds a little bit more storage and a little bit more opportunity for settling the solids, and then it gravity feeds out to the drain field. Very simple device. But if your solids accumulate over time, potentially they could be heading on over to the next compartment and then into your out into your drain field. And you want to avoid that, because your drain field is where the bulk of the treatment occurs. And if it clogs for whatever reason, then you have to dig a new drain field. So here's some examples of different types of drain field technology. The upper left is the traditional gravel trench, and in many cases that's been changed over to the use of these chambers on the bottom left. They're basically 18-inch, 2-foot diameter pipe with special slots on the side for the wastewater to leave the chamber. It basically replaces the gravel. But the whole idea behind any drain field is to distribute that wastewater over as wide of a soil area as possible to allow that infiltration. There's drip irrigation if you have a BAT unit. Sometimes they'll use drip irrigation, which is a shallower system. And then there's some experimental or innovative types of system using peat or organics to treat it. So again, lots of different options as far as your drain field. And again, the technology is evolving as time goes on. So here's a quick diagram just showing you what's going on there. And I'm not going to go into detail other than to say that there's a lot of beneficial bacteria breaking down the organics. In the case of nitrogen, most of the nitrogen coming from wastewater is in ammonia form. We have certain bacteria that convert that ammonia to nitrate, then it's converted by other bacteria to nitrite, then it's converted to nitrate. And then we have other bacteria in the absence of oxygen that will convert that nitrate to nitrogen gas. So again, it's almost like a nitrogen cycle here going on, indeed, but it just shows you some of the processes going on. And here's some interesting numbers here. Your septic tank does very little as far as removing nitrogen. But if you have a BAT unit, you can see significantly increased nitrogen remediation potential. A typical drain field, gravel trench, whatever the type you have, will remove anywhere from 20 to 40, maybe even 45% of the nitrogen. So if you had a BAT unit and you add that, the cumulative removal of nitrogen can be, 60 to 85+%. So here's a quick sketch of a generic BAT unit. It's basically an enhanced septic tank system where it's multiple compartments. You get the settling in the first compartment. The second is an aeration chamber. Again, remember all that oxygen that's required for the bacteria to break down the organics. That's what that second chamber is doing, is adding the oxygen. And it's settled again, and then it's another chamber to pump it up into your drain field system. Some of these systems will actually recirculate the water. So before it's pumped into the drain field, it's going back to the first chamber, and they're getting enhanced nitrogen removal. And the really interesting thing is to look at that jar of water coming out of a BAT. It's clear and odorless. If you were to compare that with a conventional septic tank system, that water would be extremely dark. You couldn't even see into it. So there's a big difference. So potentially these BATs also have a mechanism not only reducing nitrogen, but maybe even prolonging the life of a drain field. NDE has some great resource information on their website. You'll have that link in the resource page showing the different types of systems that are out there, what they cost, how much they cost to operate, so a wealth of information. There's currently 11 approved technologies, BAT technologies in Maryland. And we have the Bay Restoration Fund to provide funding for BATs, about $15–16 million annually. It's a great program. The counties administer the program. It's based on a priority rank system with the highest rank going to failing systems within the critical areas. But again, there's a tier of ranking and even homes outside of the critical area and even new construction, although that's a lower priority. So each county will accept applications, and depending upon what they receive, they'll allocate the money accordingly. So a great program. Certainly consider it if you're having an issue with your system and if you're in the critical areas. So some tips. Think about conserving water. Your system is designed to handle a certain amount of water per day. If you have some excessive leaks, that's actually hydraulically potentially overloading your system, and you don't want that. Garbage disposals don't work well because they're grinding up the organics in larger pieces, and it's not being processed by your septic system, and it could add more organics into your drain field, which you don't want. Avoid draining any sort of fats, oils, and greases. Don't dispose chemicals down your drains. You can use the typical quantity of your cleaners without any issue, but you certainly don't want to get rid of half a bottle of bleach down the drain, because that would kill off bacteria, etc. This is really important to only flush toilet paper. There's a lot of products out there that said they're flushable, and they are flushable, but they're not. They don't break down, and they'll clog up systems. So only toilet paper. If you have any sort of storm water, be sure you route that away from your tank and your drain field, because that's potentially saturating your soil in your drain field, and that may cause your wastewater actually to pond, to come up to the surface, and you don't want that. Driving on a drain field is a big no-no because it compacts that soil. It could break your piping, but it compacts the soil so it can't breathe or drain. And certain trees and tree roots in particular can be really problematic to certain types of systems. So we recommend that you don't plant trees. Talked about having your tank pumped and get it inspected if you haven't done so in a long time. Some of the tanks have filters on them, and just like any filter on your car, your tractor, whatever the case may be, they have to be cleaned or changed. In this case, it would be cleaned. So these are some basic septic tips to help maintain and prolong the life of your system. And that's a really important thing to think about your system. Your septic system, we like to say it's probably your most expensive appliance, if you will, in your home. Think about your appliances. You got your HVAC, which is pretty expensive, and you have your refrigerator and washer and dryer and all those types of things. But a septic system, depending upon the type, you're looking at, $6,000 to $30,000 investment, and so you definitely want to protect it. Also think about, not only are you saving yourself money by maintaining it properly, but you're also protecting your health and possibly your neighbor's health, because if you have a failing system, water's coming up, that's creating a health hazard with bacteria, etc., for pets and children, things like that. So again, lots of good reasons to maintain your system. We're going to wrap up with just an idea I get this question a lot. People have either a sand mound or they have these septic tank portals, and they're, what can they do with them? And so here's some examples. The upper left is a sand mound, and the bottom two photos are a landscape sand mound. So it can be done to help not only beautify it, but to kind of eliminate any sort of eyesore if you've got a big mound, say particularly in your front yard or even in your backyard. So things can be done, and that's definitely another webinar topic in itself. But again, just you can do things. You just have to follow certain tips in order for that system to breathe, and certain types of plants are more beneficial than others. So I'll leave you with that. Here's a wealth of information available both by your local county health department, but also MDE has a wealth of information both on water quality, wells, and septic systems. And then you have a link here to testing labs, and also that Penn State drinking water interpretation tool. Once you get your results, type it in, and it'll give you a wealth of information. And then I'm also available for any sort of follow-up questions that you might have down the road. I'll be happy to help. So thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Andy. We do have a couple questions. And you may want to check your chat. I know some came to presenter, some came to just host, but I will go through these. Let's see here. So the map of radon, arsenic, etc., that are naturally occurring across Maryland, is that slide, is there a website or something that people can go to find that?
Yeah, that's from the Maryland Geological Survey. And so if you just type in that, MD Geological Survey, they have a wealth of information on groundwater quality. They also have a lot of historical reports that talk about specific well quality in different locations in the state. So again, MD Geological Survey. Great group of folks and a great resource of information.
And Andy, I'm guessing that other states would have this because I think we have a number of people from other states. So a geological survey for their state would have that kind of information.
Great point, Shannon. They do. And again, also remember that your local health department, whether it be Public Works or Environmental Health Office, has information as well, and they are familiar with the types of water quality in the county and can make some recommendations to you. They also permit wells, but they also can assist with any sort of septic system issues as well.
Great. Okay, there's a question about a pump house. So my well has a tank on top, and it is in our pump house. So others have this kind of setup.
Yeah, so the typical well will have you'll have your well head, and then underground you don't see it in some cases unless you have a pump house like you're describing, where your well head is right there, and then that feeds into a pressure tank or a bladder tank, and so that bladder tank is regulating flow. So as you open a faucet and use water, what happens is that the pressure in that bladder tank pushes the water out into your plumbing. So that's, yes, you basically have to have a bladder tank of some sort to supply water to your home. Otherwise, your well would be running continuously. So that bladder tank allows for storage volume, and will also automatically turn on your well pump when you've used enough water capacity in that pressure or bladder tank.
All right, another interesting question. If testing a well indicates contaminants, is it necessary to report that to the local health department?
No, it's not. And so the only data that the county health departments have on wells is when a well is dug, or if there is, say, some reported contamination, and they may go out and do some testing. So no, if you test it yourself and there's contamination, that's your private information. It's also important to note that some counties offer reduced testing. So again, to run your 3 annual tests, coliform, nitrate, and E. coli, the price will vary, but it's roughly $45 to $60 depending upon the lab. And then the fuller suite of about 12 contaminants will cost $125 to $150, $160 again. But if you think about it, that's a relatively minimal investment in ensuring that you and your family are drinking good water quality. So it's worth it to do it, certainly for the sake of peace of mind, but also understanding your water. And if you have a contamination issue, as I said, that slide shows you that there's a lot of treatment options for you.
Great. All right, another question about, and it's an agricultural question. They need to install a surface drip system. What are the special actions we need to take to ensure that it's well kept?
A surface drip system.
So I'm guessing that's for vegetables, for vegetable crops. So this will be for an agricultural use.
How do you maintain that well?
And what do they need? I guess what is something annually they should do or on a regular basis to do to make sure it's well kept? And I would think testing is one of them.
Yeah, testing is one of them. The other thing is to be sure that your filtration system on any drip system is working effectively. So, follow those recommendations as far as cleaning your filters, because that's huge. You think about the pore size in any sort of drip irrigation. It's very, very small, and so very susceptible to clogging if your filtration system is not working properly. So, clean the filters, replace them depending upon the type that you have, and testing your water. And so for a drip system, particularly if it's, produce, ready to eat sort of produce, if that's the right term, greens and things like that, you definitely want to test it for any sort of bacterial contaminants. E. coli, coliforms, that give you an indication that there's an issue with the source of water, and then you could do some treatment. Our conserve program, and Shannon, you're familiar with all that too. Wealth of information about that, about trying to either reuse water, or even if it's a well, you still want to be sure that, because again, it depends upon the well source, the aquifer. Is it a shallow aquifer? If so, it's more susceptible to contamination, including bacterial contamination. So test, maintain your filters.
Okay, another agricultural question. They have a defunct well. They're not sure if it's been cemented in, but they're trying to see if it would be cost effective to revive it for agricultural irrigation versus paying for city water.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's common. So you have to have a well person to come out and examine it, to give you indication on that, because again, it depends upon the type of well that it is, and then maybe if there's some records on that well. Again, a lot of older wells we don't have records for, unfortunately. But again, trying to find out from somebody, a professional, on the type of water that you'd be able to get from that, but then also be able to give you an indication of what that cost would be associated to revitalize that well.
All right. Another question. Are there special considerations for a septic system located adjacent to a riparian zone?
Well, with any septic system, depending upon when it was installed, Certainly if it's, more recent, several decades and more recent, there are certain horizontal separation distances that are used, like 100 feet from a well, for example, or 25 feet from, buildings, or, so there is vertical separation recommendations for different types of waters as well, a pond, a stream, things like that. I could provide that information offline to you to get more specifics, because I can't recall exactly what those separation distances are. But that's important, certainly. Again, it really depends upon the lay of the land, the slope, for example, and the location of the septic and the type of septic system it is. But again, older systems are installed, and that was before there was, development of certain vertical separations distances.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I can provide, however, whatever is the easiest way to provide that specific information, I could provide that to you, Shannon, or to the individual.
Okay, and we can also add it to that page if there are certain specs. I think a lot of that is, like in Maryland, we have, the critical area, which, so, there's the federal regulations and state and then local regulations. So,
yeah, and actually, I think that I know that information is on the MDE on-site system division website. That's on the bottom of the reference page. So they could look it up. Glad to look it up and provide an easier access to that information.
Right. Does the state or county require a septic system has to remove a certain % of nitrogen from wastewater?
No, it's not a requirement. With the exception of the BAT program, the approved systems have to remove at least 50% of the nitrogen. So if you look at the chart that I showed, all the 11 approved BAT systems remove at least 50%, and that range currently is about 55 to 77% removal of nitrogen. But a conventional system, no. The conventional system design itself, and in the permitting process, looking at the soils and things like that, take that into account, that they're trying to maximize the nutrient remediation out of a conventional system.
Okay. So do you recommend not to use bleach at all as a household cleaner in the house, or just not to dispose a large amount down the drain?
Yeah, if you use a normal amount for your laundry and for any sort of, cleaning your kitchen, whatever, that's perfectly acceptable. It's kind of built in there. If you remember just the amount of bacteria that's in a septic system, a little bit of chlorine will be diluted down. You may get a little die off of the bacteria, but it's not, it's not going to affect your system. It's dumping, of any chemical. And bleach is just one chemical, but other chemicals can kill off your bacteria, which then affect, the ability of your system to reduce the organics. And again, a lot of it is about protecting your drain fields. You don't want excessive organics going out into your drain fields, because it's a soil system and the soil can get clogged over time.
All right. I think I got through all the questions, Andy. Let's see. There were some questions about the recording, so we will definitely have the recording and Andy's slide set posted on the web page, and you'll get an email notifying you where that is. Okay, Chris has another good question. My water bill has been surprisingly affordable, thankfully, maybe because we had so much rain. Okay, very good. We were talking about the cost of town water, and I guess, again, it's very different depending on the municipalities.
Absolutely. Variability in the cost of water across the state as far as public utilities, yeah.
All right. And Andy, your contact information is on the front in case people have follow-up questions.
It is.
That's on the first slide? Okay.
It's on the last slide, too. So
Perfect.
And then they can, go to our website. We have a lot of resources there. We also have a YouTube channel with some additional recorded webinars as well on this topic. So please utilize that. I'll be available for any follow-up questions that you may have. Happy to work with you and help any way I can.
Perfect. One more question came in. Special needs for alternative septic systems.
Okay, yeah, so there is this term, innovative and alternative systems. And what I have found working with the county offices is that they're trying to work with homeowners and sites to provide a system that is, that works. Obviously, they're required to protect, public health. And so they want to be sure that whatever system is designed, it works. There are different designs, innovative or alternative systems out there. I work with one person that's actually using certain types of vegetation to help, take up, the wastewater, but also to treat some of the nutrients. There are combinations of systems, if you will, looking at different types of drain fields. Again, it's all about site-specific options. What is the best option? And so when a system is designed by the county or designed by an engineer, they take that into consideration. The soil will dictate really what you can do and what type of systems required. And again, many of the counties are open to look at kind of creative ways to be able to provide a system that works. And if the soil's not good and the system's not possible, then unfortunately that might require either hook up to sewer or you have to use holding tanks. So again, it's very site specific. These are great questions, by the way.
They really are good, very good conversation. So doesn't look like we have any more. At this point, I'm just going to go ahead. We'll see if we have any more come in, but I'm going to stop the recording now. We're almost an hour.